You woke up cold this morning. Maybe you grabbed a hoodie without even thinking twice. Maybe you cranked the thermostat or yanked the blanket up another 6 inches and went right back to sleep. Cost you nothing. Took you 3 seconds, tops. Now, picture having none of that. No hoodie, no blanket, no thermostat, not even the concept that any of that stuff could exist. You're standing outside, buck naked, at night, and the temperature is dropping like a rock. For basically the entire run of human evolution, that wasn't some worst-case scenario. That was just a cold night. There was no throw on a jacket. There was only your body, totally exposed against whatever the weather decided to throw at you. And for millions of years, that setup actually worked fine because your body was built for it. Then things changed, not gradually and not by choice at first. A massive climate shift flipped bare skin from a superpower into a liability, and it forced humans into inventing one of the weirdest, most underrated pieces of tech we've ever come up with: clothes. This isn't some cute story about fashion. This is a story about a species that almost froze itself right out of existence, and the happy accident that saved it. So let's back up, because here's the part that sounds completely backwards. For most of our evolutionary history, humans didn't need clothes to stay warm. They needed to stay cool. That was the actual problem. Go back roughly 2 million years to the early ancestors who first started strutting around upright on the open grasslands of East Africa. The sun out there does not play. Temperatures blow past 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, basically zero shade for miles in any direction. Every other big animal roaming around is covered in fur, and fur, in that kind of heat, is a straight-up liability. Fur traps warmth against the skin, great at night, terrible at noon. Lions get around this by chilling in the shade and hunting at dawn and dusk instead. Antelope pant it out, same trick your dog does, cycling air over a wet tongue to dump heat. Our ancestors went a different route entirely. They ditched almost all their body hair, and in exchange, they picked up something basically no other mammal on Earth has: roughly 2 million sweat glands spread across nearly bare skin. Put those two things together, bare skin plus heavy-duty sweating, and you've basically built the most efficient cooling system in the animal kingdom. Sweat evaporates straight off the skin instead of getting trapped in a coat of fur, and evaporation yanks heat out of the body fast. That combo is why early humans could pull off something almost no other big animal on the savannah could: keep grinding for hours, right through the hottest part of the day, while everything else was forced to bail and hide in the shade. A lot of researchers think this is a huge part of how early humans hunted before they even had decent weapons. Not by out-sprinting an animal, because humans lose that race every single time, no contest, but by wearing it down, chasing it slow and steady through the brutal midday heat until the animal's body just gave out from overheating while the human kept on trucking. That's sometimes called persistence hunting, and it only works because the human body evolved to dump heat instead of trap it. So for a long stretch of time, going naked wasn't some flaw that needed fixing. It was the whole design. Bare skin meant you could cool down fast. Cooling down fast meant you could hunt when literally nothing else could handle the heat. For a savannah-built primate, that setup was close to perfect. The problem? Humans didn't stick around the savannah. Around 2 million years ago, a species called Homo erectus pulled off something no human ancestor had ever done before. They walked out of Africa, and they just kept walking, straight into places their bodies were never built for. Higher latitudes, harsh winters, mountain elevations, and eventually, tens of thousands of years down the line, straight into Ice Age Europe and Asia, where nights could drop below freezing for months on end. And here's where things get genuinely dicey. Evolution moves slow, like painfully slow. Growing thick fur back, the kind a wolf or a bear rocks, isn't a few thousand-year fix. It took millions of years to lose the fur in the first place, shaped by a very specific set of pressures out on the African savannah. There was no equivalent slow cooking process ready to grow it back once humans hit the cold. The species that had just become elite at shedding heat now had basically zero built-in way to hold on to it. This is where the numbers get scary. A human body loses heat dramatically faster when it's exposed and unprotected, especially the second any moisture gets involved, whether that's sweat, rain, or melting snow. In cold, dry air, below freezing, bare skin starts bleeding warmth almost instantly, and without insulation, hypothermia can set in within a few hours. sometimes way less. Core body temperature only needs to drop a couple degrees before muscle control starts slipping, judgment goes out the window, and the body starts shutting down non-essential systems to protect the organs at the center. Left unchecked, that kills you. Quietly too, no big dramatic struggle, often while the person still thinks they're totally fine. So picture an early human crew pushing north into these colder regions, no fur, no shelter tech yet, walking straight into winters that could kill an exposed adult in one bad night. This should have been game over. And honestly, in a lot of ways, it very nearly was. But at some point, somebody figured something out that changed everything. They took the skin off an animal they'd just killed, and instead of tossing it aside, they wrapped it around themselves. Obviously, we don't know who that person was. No name, no date, no dramatic single moment we can point at and go, there, that's the guy. But we can find traces of the idea itself, and those traces tell us it happened way earlier than most people assume. One of the wildest pieces of evidence doesn't come from cave art or some burial site. It comes from lice. Yeah, lice. Human head lice and human body lice are close cousins. But body lice have one very specific requirement to survive. They need clothing to live in. They basically can't hang out on bare skin for long because they lay their eggs in fabric fibers, not in hair. So, at some point, those two lice populations split apart genetically, evolving into totally separate, specialized species. And by tracing how long ago that split happened, scientists can estimate how long humans have been wearing something on the regular enough that a whole new parasite species evolved around it. That estimate lands well over 100,000 years ago, maybe even further back. Long before written history, long before farming, long before permanent settlements, somebody out there was already suiting up regularly enough to create a brand new ecological niche for a bug to move into. Around that same rough window, archaeologists start digging up scrapers, specifically stone tools with a very particular wear pattern, edges worn down and polished in a way that doesn't match cutting meat or shaping wood. It matches something else entirely, scraping the fat and flesh off the underside of animal hides to prep them, and working the hide soft so it doesn't go stiff as it dries out. Find a bunch of those scrapers clustered together at one site, especially in colder regions, and you're basically looking at a workshop, not a fashion studio, a survival workshop, running full-time. Then, tens of thousands of years later, something even more specific shows up. Bone needles, some with a tiny eye at one end, clearly built for threading a cord or sinew through. That's not just draping a hide over your shoulders anymore. That's sewing. That's fitted clothing, shaped to the actual body, with sleeves, tighter seams, way better heat retention than some loose hide flopped over your back. Needles like this start popping up at sites tied to some of the coldest environments humans had ever lived in. Ice Age, Siberia among them, in populations pushing into territory that would have killed them fast without exactly this kind of tech. So the timeline shakes out something like this. First, likely well over 100,000 years back, somebody starts wrapping raw hides around their body. Crude, unfitted, but enough to slow the heat loss down. That's the move the lice evidence is hinting at. Then, tools develop to prep those hides the right way, scraping them clean, working them soft enough that they won't crack or rot as fast. And finally, sewing shows up, turning a stiff hide into shaped, fitted, wearable armor against the cold, lining up almost perfectly with humans pushing into some of the coldest real estate on the planet. Each of those steps sounds tiny from where we're standing right now. From where they were standing, each one was the difference between surviving one winter and surviving 50 of them, in 50 completely different places. Because once clothing existed, and existed well enough, it stopped being a workaround and turned into something closer to a master key. It cracked open places that had been completely off limits before. Without fur and without fabric, the entire northern half of the planet is basically a no-go zone for a human body for huge chunks of the year. Add in clothing that actually works, and that same landscape goes from deadly to survivable to livable to eventually just home. Some researchers think this is one of the real turning points that let modern humans spread as far and as fast as they did, right alongside groups like Neanderthals, who were already dug in across colder parts of Europe and Asia, having adapted to that cold through their actual bodies over a modern humans didn't get that biological head start. What they had instead was a piece of tech that could be invented, upgraded, and passed down, generation after generation, way faster than evolution could ever move. That's really the crux of it. Fur is something a species slowly grows into over hundreds of thousands of years, locked into one body plan, one set of genes, one narrow band of environments where it actually pulls its weight. Clothing is something a mind dreams up once and then just teaches to the next person. You can redesign it overnight if it flops. Thicken it up for a brutal winter, thin it out for a mild one. Change the whole setup in a single generation instead of 100,000. In evolutionary terms, that's basically cheating. A polar bear needed millions of years of genetic tweaking to handle the Arctic. A human just needed an idea, a blade, a needle, and a whole lot of trial and error. There's a rougher side to this story too, one that's easy to skip right past. Clothing didn't spread because somebody had a genius idea one day and everybody hopped on board enthusiastically. It almost certainly spread because the people who didn't figure it out in the coldest spots didn't stick around to pass anything on. Every trick that worked got carried forward by the folks who actually lived. Every mistake, a hide prepped badly, stitching that let the rain through, a design that didn't cover enough skin, probably ended with someone freezing before they ever got the chance to pass the lesson down. What we're really staring at in those scraper marks and needle holes is generations of quiet, brutal trial and error, refined under the harshest possible penalty for screwing it up. It's worth zooming in on just how tight the margins actually were, because this wasn't some gradual, comfortable rollout. Take a site like Denisova Cave, way up in Siberia, or the string of Ice Age sites scattered across what's now northern Russia and Ukraine. People were living there during the coldest stretch of the last ice age, when winter temperatures could sit way below zero for months straight. There's basically no way a human body survives that stretch bare-skinned, full stop, no debate. So, when you find human remains at those sites, what you're actually looking at is proof, indirect but rock solid, that these people had cracked the clothing problem well enough to make a genuinely brutal environment livable. Every single person buried at a site like that represents a chain of clothing knowledge that worked, passed down and refined by people who came before them. Compare that to Neanderthals, who'd been living in cold parts of Europe for a couple 100,000 years before modern humans even showed up there. Neanderthals had some real biological advantages for the cold. Stockier builds that held heat better, bigger noses that warmed up freezing air before it hit the lungs, more built-in insulation overall. For a long stretch, that biology alone might have been enough. But there's a growing pile of evidence that Neanderthals were working hides too, just maybe less intensively, less specialized than what modern humans eventually pulled off. Some researchers think that gap, modern humans building genuinely tailored, layered clothing versus Neanderthals relying more on their bodies, plus simpler wraps, might have been one of the quiet factors in how things eventually played out between the two groups as the climate kept swinging wildly during the Ice Age. Nobody's saying it's the whole story. Extinction stories are always messier than one clean cause, but it's a real piece of the